So, welcome to the purpose of this book. And we are picking up, we're in the chapter Wives, and we are on page 112. David, anything to recap to this point or just dive in?
I am just going to point out kind of where we're at for anyone who's new. So we're in the chapter two wives, as David stated. This is a long chapter. This is 17 pages, one page longer than Bill's story. Let me see how it works. It's like 13 pages. So that's 4 pages longer than even how it works. But in our 12th step, it says that we practice these principles in all our affairs. It doesn't really give us some real direction in working with others on how to do that. That's what these next three chapters, working to wives, to the employers, and the family afterwards. We're going to look for principles of success, and that's what we've been doing over the last couple of weeks. So we're on page 112. We're going to be starting the first paragraphs. Where by the time we get to page 113, we'll be about halfway through this chapter. So, and I'm going to point out, and David will point out all kinds of stuff that, Bill's chauvinistic ways because he wrote this chapter. We'll point out that kind of stuff. But also at the same time as we're going to flip the switch a little bit, the script a little bit. I'm sorry, meaning that I'm going to look at this in a different way, like what I could be doing, or how can I practice have principles of success in my life if I do these directions that Bill is posing to the wife or the spouse or to the partner in the relationship. We're just going to flip the script because this is not one of my favorite chapters. If I went to meetings early in sobriety and you said we're reading the two wives, my eyes rolled just like all you guys' eyes rolled. I promise you that. But man, when you read this thing in a different way, if I open my mind and my eyes to a different way to look into this thing and how to study this thing, I see how I can practice principles and success in my life, and I'm awake to them. I'm not asleep dreaming. I'm awake, and that's what I love about these chapters now is something to really celebrate and just look at it from a different view. That's all I got there.
Okay, thank you. So, we're going to pick up the first full paragraph on page 112. He probably has several alcoholics. So, we're talking, right? We're talking to the wife, to the spouse about the husband. He probably has several alcoholics among his own acquaintances. So the alcoholic probably does. You might suggest that you both take an interest in them. Drinkers like to help other drinkers. Your husband may be willing to talk to one of them.
Nothing, Amy. Okay. So I'm just going to point out something that these things that stand out to me. So he probably has several alcoholics among his own acquaintances. That's all I had. And they're just acquaintances. Good friends are gone. They are long, long gone in my life. Family members, everybody's gone. This is towards my bottom. And my bottom was a feeling that this is my life is never going to get me better than this. That was my bottom. So acquaintances is a word that I circled there because the friendships have gone away. I've just ruined them all. Then it says drinkers like to help other drinkers. Yeah, even like we have to solve world problems while we're drinking. By the way, we do all that kind of stuff. We work. Maybe you've heard Joe and Charlie do change around the 90 step promises a little bit, and I'm not going to do it for you today because I'm not prepared for it. But looking at it as when I was drinking, I would be amazed before I'm halfway through my night. My financial insecurities will leave me because I'm just drinking. I don't care about it anymore. So it's just a cute little way to look at them things. But it says your husband may be willing to talk to one of them. So if, as a sponsor, as a recovered alcoholic and drug addict, I will be more than willing to take a new person with me to do a first step on someone. Absolutely. Would I send them out alone without being armed with the facts about themselves in this book? I would not do that. I would not send them to a treatment center by themselves. I would not send them to a school to talk to the public. Wouldn't do all these things because we got to learn a little bit about the traditions and not how to violate them. But I would certainly take them with me. And that's what my sponsor did with me. Before I was a year sober, he took me to a treatment center. What happened? It lit a fire underneath me. Oh my goodness, that I could be useful. That is in the bedevilments. It talks about feeling useless. That's how I always felt. The opposite of useless, and probably the success story to life is feeling useful. is when I went to that treatment center with my sponsor, and I wasn't really allowed to talk because there's this grouchy old timer there that kind of seen me in meetings before, and he said, "You don't get to talk tonight." And he was probably right that I didn't say anything. But the bottom line is I proved him wrong after I started studying this book, and he stopped talking to me after that too. But he just got a little offended that I was a big book thumper. But the thing is like I lit a fire underneath me. You know, we have a three-sided triangle: recovery, I was recovered alcoholic; unity, the fellowship in itself; but service. Like I was 1 year sober on my date. It was November 13th, 1999. November 13th, 2000. I called that treatment center. I said that was their requirement to have 1 year sobriety. I called them. I said, "Can I come and volunteer?" They said, "We'd love to have you." And I've been doing treatment centers, David and I, for 25 years, 24 years. You know, the first year they didn't let me do it. But anyways, so light a fire, acquaintances, just kind of covering a little bit, and that's just my take on that paragraph.
Yeah, I think just, to add just a bit to what David was talking about, what's this paragraph describing? It's talking about getting into service and getting into service early. So the suggestion here is, okay, so your husband may not be ready to get sober, but maybe he's got a buddy who's like, oh man, like, Bert's a way worse alcoholic than me. Maybe I should see if I can go help Bert, and then what happens when I spend a little time and effort and mental energy not thinking about myself? Maybe I start to get a little bit better. Just a little break, a little sunlight through the clouds, and then maybe I can actually start to pick up the set of tools for myself. I was just working with a newcomer last night, and he's been banging around for about 7 months, and he's into his ninth step, and was trying to helping another buddy try to get him reinvigorated. He's like, I don't know if I should make all these amends. I feel like I'm forcing myself among these people, like let sleeping dogs lie. And I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, I think this is about getting into action. And the book tells us exactly how to handle this. There's no forcing of anything, right? And it's just like, he's searching for this deep spiritual meaning. And I'm like, you will act your way into finding those answers you're looking for. And I think that's what this is really talking about here. If this kind of approach does not catch your husband's interest, it may be best to drop the subject. But after a friendly talk, your husband will usually revive the topic himself. This may take patient waiting, but it will be worth it. Meanwhile, you might try to help the wife of another serious drinker. If you act upon these principles, your husband may stop or moderate. Nothing? Okay.
Yeah. So the only thing I'm going to add to that is let's connect some dots. Go back to page 94 of our text, and on the second paragraph, which is the second full paragraph at the bottom of the page, it says your candidate. So Bill uses words like candidate and protege, to describe sponsees, because there really were no sponsees or sponsors back then in 1939 when this book was published. Not a lot of membership either. So your candidate may give reasons why he need not follow all the program. Okay, listen, consider what they're saying here. Here's why. He may rebel at the thought of a drastic house cleaning. That's 4 and 5. That's 8 and 9, right? I don't want to do that. I've hurt too many people, or I didn't hurt anybody at all. Are you kidding me? Like, I only hurt myself. It's like, and I felt that way. I'm only speaking from experience. And then it says, requires a discussion with other people. Do not contrast such views. So, in other words, I only get to share my experience. That's what I get to share. I'm not there to judge. I'm just there to share my experience. Tell him you once felt as he does. Absolutely. But you doubt whether you would have made much progress had you not taken action. What is the action? To take that healthy risk, if I may use an oxymoron there, and say, do the 4th step. Just do it. Write out the resentment list. Start in the first column, go to the second column, go to the third column, go to the fourth column. Do the fears, do the sex history or personal relationships, and just be as honest and thorough as you possibly can. If I don't get rid of these things, I will stay blocked, and I will not see the sunlight of the spirit. I will not get that experience. I will not stay sober. Ask myself one question: how am I doing on my own power? How am I doing on my own power with the bedevilments? How am I doing on my own power with comes to drinking, with the craving? Can I control the amount I drink once they start? And once they stop, can I stay stop? And then the manageability, which I brought up from the bedevilments. How am I doing on the bedevilments on my own power? All those 3 things that I just discussed there, right there, are all internal. Every one of them. And then it says in your first visit, back to the text, on your first visit, tell him about the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. Absolutely. Invite him in, introduce him to all my friends, have them feel welcome him, show him where the coffee's at, have him sit right next to you, whatever the case is. We want to make this attraction. Why? So they come back. It is my responsibility to make this program an attraction, which means I need to be an attraction. Another word for that is a demonstration in their life that these principles actually absolutely work. And I've had a personality change sufficient enough to recover from this illness. I've had them over my house so they can see how I interact with my wife and my kids when my kids were little. I did that because someone did that for me. I wouldn't have done that on my own thinking. I would have never had anybody over my house that was a drunk. Are you kidding me? I would do that with open arms today. So if he shows interest, lend him a copy of your book. Or as I just stated, take him to a damn meeting. Like, it's okay to read the book. Let's read the book together, but let's introduce him to the fellowship, get him recovered, introduce him to service, because these are important things that I fill out the three sides of my triangle equally.
Yeah, I think David did a nice job there taking us back into that chapter. And I had some other notes with callbacks to page 95. And I don't need to take us back there. I don't think. It's just there's continues to be a lot of parallels here, and just the gist of what is being talked about here is don't badger the husband or wife if they're not interested in trying to pursue recovery right now. And if you just make a note, the first couple paragraphs on 95, it's the same thing. Unless your friend wants to talk about it further, don't wear it. You're welcome, right? Et cetera, et cetera. But I think the more important part is, again, the call to service. About 2/3 of the way through the paragraph. Meanwhile, you might try to help the wife of another serious drinker. So my husband doesn't want to get well. My alcoholic husband, my alcoholic wife. Okay, don't push it. Right? You could make things worse. So what can you do? You can be of service to somebody in the same position as you. And maybe, just maybe, you'll start to get a little healthier because they're taking great pains to reinforce the concept that our families get spiritually sick around us. So maybe they start to get better. And if you act upon these principles, your husband may stop or moderate. The alcoholic may pick up the spiritual way of life from sort of the Al-Anonic spouse getting involved. I'm sure it happens frequently. Continuing on. Suppose, however, that your husband fits the description of number 2. So again, these were the 4 types of alcoholics, and number 2 is on page 109. Right? So suppose, however, that your husband fits the description of number 2. The same principles which apply to husband number 1 should be practiced. But after his next binge, ask him if he would really like to get over drinking for good. Not just for today, but for good. Do not ask that he do it for you or anyone else. Just would he like to? Nothing from Ab. Okay.
Yeah, so I like this, and David pointed out that number 2 is on page 109. It's in the first paragraph. So I just want to skim over that just real quick because I just want to refresh my memory what that looks like. So he has lack of control when he's drinking. He actually entirely out of hand. He admits that it's true that he possibly gets drunk at all the wrong times. He tries various means of moderating and trying to stay dry on his own power. He sometimes drinks in the morning. He's remorseful the next day. And then he says, perhaps at the bottom of that paragraph on 109, the first paragraph, perhaps he can still tend to business fairly well. So, an alcoholic who can still go to work. I was that kind of guy. So sometimes at the end it was rough. And he has by no means ruined everything. Not quite. I was about ready to become 3, and then I certainly turned into 4, alcoholic 4, as we say among ourselves. And here's the kicker here. He wants to want to stop. That's an italic writing for a reason. That is so important that I want to stop. David pointed it out, and we were stressing this here. Do you want to be good, done it for all? I mean, that is something. That's the question. I mean, are you just doing this for external purposes so you make the border crossing with mama, get that job back, stay out of the prison, or whatever that case is? I mean, those are all reasonable reasons. But if you're a real alcoholic, as the book describes to me, then I am going to either die or get locked up or institutionalized. And that was actually, I didn't die, but I got institutionalized and I got locked up. And I didn't care for either one of those things. But luckily for me, I'd already been sobered up by the time that happened to me. It was just consequences of my actions of my last day I drank. But so the bottom line here is like, am I good? Am I done good and for all? That's a reasonable question to ask. And I don't really believe in my heart of hearts that you cannot honestly, if you meant it, frothy emotional appeal, would I pass a lie detector test after a really rotten day, rotten bottom? Yeah, I would say I want to be done good and for all. I would tell you that because I really, really meant it. But to say it and that action needs to be followed up for the rest of my entire life, and we bring this up a ton. Get recovered through steps 1 through 9, and then live in the disciplines of 10, 11, and 12. And that's the key to being useful, live in the sunlight of spirit, walking hand in hand with my creators, watching all the promises in the big come true for me. And when they come true for me, and if I'm practicing these principles and having these principles of success in my life, they get to affect other people in a positive way. This is the way my life was supposed to intended to be all along, but I was blocking off because of my selfishness and my self-centeredness that we talk about on page 60 through 63. And then when I get free of that, because I don't have the power to remove my own selfishness, then I start to live a life that God intended me to live all along. And I can call on and have access to this power anytime that I want, and I choose to. And I do get to choose that. But I'm aware of it. I'm awake to it. I'm not asleep, dreaming, I'm awake anymore. And I absolutely love, love, love being sober. And I bet you if you asked anybody in my family if they love me being sober, I bet they would agree with that 100%. But I don't mean an untreated alcoholism. I mean it as a treated alcoholic, like one who lives the principles of success, which are all the 12 steps.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit. There's a callback here as well to page 90 in this paragraph. There's just this whole chapter, right? It's really just so much of a parallel of working with others. But after his next binge, and ask him if he'd really like to get over drinking for good. So make a note, page 90, paragraph 1, 2, 3. Sometimes it's wise to wait until he goes on a binge. So Bill's really got his greatest hits of how to help somebody get sober. And as he does frequently, he's beating us about the head to make these things sink in, which is great because if you're like me, you're stubborn with a lot coming out of my mouth and not so much going into my ears. So I need to hear things many times before they do sink in. All right. So after his next binge, ask him if he'd really like to get over drinking for good. I emphasize that. David doubled down. I'll triple down. Guys, this is about a new way of life, a design for living. This is not a day at a time as it relates to my drinking. I live life a day at a time, of course, right? I get a daily reprieve contingent on, my spiritual fitness, which is a direct result of my relationship with God. But I am done drinking and drugging and engaging in other destructive behaviors. And I think not only is it okay, let's just let newcomers know that's what this is about. Nothing drives me crazier than when there's a newcomer, they're new to me. Maybe they announce they've been banging around for a couple of months and they make some comment like, I know I'm going to have to fight not drinking every day for the rest of my life. And I'm like, dude, I'm so sorry. That is the message you've been getting, that no one is giving you the right message. I would, guys, I'm not even trying to be too graphic here. I would put a gun in my mouth if that's the life I was leading, that every day I was fighting not drinking. Hell to the no. And this last one, let me just I will triple down on this too. Do not ask that he do it for you or anyone else. Just would he like to? And I think this is the genesis of, the one of our slogans or sayings that we hear a lot in meetings, which is, you got to do it for yourself. You got to get sober for yourself. You can't do it for your kids. You can't do it for your wife, your husband. It's true. Everybody will benefit. The book is taking great pains to talk about that. Everybody around me is going to benefit. David's always coloring in stories about that with his wife and 5 daughters, right? People around us, their lives improve. But this just starts because I want to get sober more than I want to keep going. It comes out of want. It doesn't come out of necessity. And then what makes the difference is the action, right? All these slogans. I said for years until somebody said something that made more sense. You say, AA, for example, it's not for people who need it. It's for people who want it. And that does make sense to me. But then somebody said it, no, it's not for people who want it. It's for people who do it, for people who do the work. And I was like, hot damn. That's right. It's not enough to want it. Got to do it. Got to be in action. Next paragraph. The chances are he would. So that was to, just what he liked to. The chances are he would. Show him your copy of this book and tell him what you have found out about alcoholism. Show him that as alcoholics, the writers of the book understand. Tell him some of the interesting stories you've read. If you think he will be shy of a spiritual remedy, ask him to look at the chapter on alcoholism. Then perhaps he will be interested enough to continue. So all these little tactics Bill's laying out here. Ab? No? Okay.
Yeah, so this paragraph here, Bill's using they use the word show twice within 2 sentences. Bill doesn't do that kind of stuff. But this is, I need to show, be a demonstration in their lives, and David and I are really big on doing this, like get them through the steps quickly. Andy will adhere to this too. Window of opportunity. We don't know how fast that thing's going to slam shut, right? We got that from our good friend Howard, right, Bert? And that is something that we need to do. Quickly get them to God. Because beyond human aid, I got no power, no choice, no control. But then take our time and go back word for word through the text and teach them, show them our copy of the book, and then tell them how you found the solution, and the solution is in the steps. And then it says, show him that as alcoholics, the writers of this book understand. So I'm looking for similarities and not differences. Like when I'm reading Bill's story, I'm looking at, did I drink like Bill, feel like Bill, or think like Bill? Anytime I'm in a meeting, drink, think, or feel like that person. Don't look for differences. Look for similarities. Do I want what you have? There are some people I would say absolutely, especially all these fine people in this meeting. I want everything that you guys have. But I've been to some meetings that I want nothing that those people have. And they're a good demonstration to me also. So, but my opportunity here is to show them, be armed with the facts about myself, take them through this text here. And then on the top of page 113, I just want to relate one thing. In More About Alcoholism that he's talking about, referencing here on page 30, we read this at a lot of meetings. Most of us have been unwilling to admit that we're all alcoholics. I'm not going to read the whole thing for time purposes, but the second full paragraph, it says, we learned that we had to fully concede our innermost self. How do we learn that? First 10 pages of the doctor's opinion and up to page 29 at this point. So Bill has already outlined for us, along with Dr. Soakworth, that once I take a drink, I have this abnormal reaction to it, and it'll always be like that. And it never happens to the average temper drinker, but it will always happen to me. So so we're talking about doctor's opinion. The first 23 pages is related to the craving, and pages 23 through 43 is related to the obsession. So, and then this is a threefold illness. I can't leave that out. And on page 52 is a great description, as well as page 60 through 63, what my life looks like, unmanageable. But the thing I have to really pay attention to is this, as I read that paragraph on page 30 in the first paragraph, was we learned that we had to fully concede our innermost self. That is such a powerful statement. More strength in that statement, that sentence there, than saying I'm powerless over alcohol. Because a lot of times we hear a message that is not out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Like, I'm powerless over people, places, and things. No, I'm not. Where's that in the book? It's not in the book. It's not. But I'm powerless over alcohol and all mind-altering substances. I am. But if I can see to my innermost self, that's really a reflection to look internally. Like, yeah, once I take a drink, I can't stop. And once I stop, I cannot stay stopped. And my life is terribly unmanageable, which is the real problem anyways. And back to the book here, on page 30 in the first paragraph, strong language he's talking about here. This is the first step in recovery. When I concede to my innermost self, that's the first step in recovery. Why? Because the delusion that we're like other people, or presently may be, has to be smashed. I have to let go of any ideas. And we talk about that, and just kind of and this is just something that someone taught me a long, long time ago. In the front of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, before the title page, there's a blank page. And that blank page tells me that I have to let go of all my old ideas. That's what I have written in my book, in my blank page. Let go of all my old ideas. Whatever I think is going to work for me, I got to let go of them. David read our version of the set aside prayer before the meeting. God, please set aside everything I think I know about myself, my unmanageability, my spiritual path, and you for an open mind and a new experience of myself, my unmanageability, and my spiritual path, and especially you. I need new ideas. Working with others, I'll get new ideas. Working with my sponsor, I'll get new ideas. Studying this book, I get new ideas. Listening to speakers, coming to Zoom meetings, hanging out with you people. This is what I need to do. And that's just, my life looks 180 degrees different than it did even, especially 25 years ago, but it's better than it's ever been even a month ago or 6 months ago or a year or 2 years, because I'm trying to grow an understanding of effectiveness, what God's will is for me.
Mm. Yeah, so in this paragraph, the chances are he would like to get better, right? So then there's a whole bunch of direction what to do if that's what we sense. What's the first direction? Show him or copy this book and tell him what you found out about alcoholism. So that suggests that, you know, the alcoholic spouse hasn't been willing to read the book yet, but the other spouse, right, that doesn't have the alcoholic problem has read and at least got to this point and saying, hey, here's what I've learned. Then there's a little bit more direction. Show him that as alcoholics, the writers of the book understand, right? So show him, and then tell him some of the interesting stories you've read. So the stories to this point, and then certainly in the back of the book, if you read the whole thing, if you think he's going to be shy of a spiritual remedy, ask him to look chapter on alcoholism. Yeah, maybe look at the chapter We Agnostics as well. Right? That's more direction. Perhaps he'll be interested enough to continue. So show him, tell him, and then ask him. I didn't have to ask him at all my other show, tell, and then ask him circled as well.
Mm-hmm.
If he's enthusiastic about, if he's in, I have so many notes in here, guys. I have trouble reading this. I need to. If he's enthusiastic, your cooperation will mean a great deal. If he is lukewarm or he thinks he's not an alcoholic, we suggest you leave him alone. Woo! It's a pretty strong statement right there. Avoid urging him to follow our program. The seed has been planted in his mind. He knows that thousands of men, much like himself, have recovered. But don't remind him of this after he's been drinking, or he may be angry. Sooner or later, you are likely to find him reading the book once more. Wait until repeated stumbling convinces him he must act. For the more you hurry him, the longer his recovery may be delayed.
I do have lukewarm, which is just not enthusiastic.
Thank you.
That's a good definition, actually, for that. Good job, Abby. Yeah, I wouldn't have gave that definition, but I like it because it relates to this sentence and the next, this paragraph and the next, because Bill uses the same word and terminology here: enthusiastic and enthusiasm. So, should we be enthusiastic and enthusiastic? Absolutely, we should be. I mean, we live two lives in one: the life I lived before I got here and the life that I live now. Polar opposites, and Chris Raymer, if you guys like him, I like him very, very much, and was somebody I listened to very honest about, and I listen to him still today. He says, "Should we be sunbeams for Jesus?" Yeah, we should. Absolutely. Let's shout from the mountaintops how this stuff works and be enthusiastic about it. But having some knowledge about it will help also. That's why we study this book as a fellowship. And then it says recovered. David really emphasized that word. And then in the first edition, it said he knows that over 100 men, much like himself, have recovered, because he's been introduced to that by myself early in sobriety with Bill and all those guys, that the first 100 had recovered. So they had a very strong success rate. And I'm going to talk about that in two more paragraphs. So I don't want to blow it yet, because there's some content that's got to lead up to that. But yeah, they had a 75% success rate back then. So I can't make anybody do anything they don't want to do. All I can do is a demonstration for them.
Just trying to think of anything else to add here. Nah, I think we'll move on. I think David did a nice job there. If you have a number 3 husband, so again, back on, where was number 3?
109.
Bottom 109, thank you, sir.
Mhm.
If you have a number 3 husband, you may be in luck. Be certain he wants to stop. You can go to him with his volume as joyfully as though you had struck oil. He may not share your enthusiasm, but he is practically sure to read the book and he may go for the program at once. If he does not, you will probably not have long to wait. Again, you should not crowd him. Let him decide for himself. Cheerfully see him through more sprees.
Mm.
Talk about his condition or this book only when he raises the issue. In some cases, it may be better to let someone outside the family present the book. They can urge action without arousing hostility. If your husband is otherwise a normal individual, your chances are good at this stage. Anything else? No?
So this is a principle of success is in that paragraph it talks about share your enthusiasm. That is a principle of success. This is how I am, fortunately or unfortunately, when you're around me all the time. You know, I am a salesperson. I own my own business, so I do have to listen more than I talk. I just get to talk more than I listen on Zoom. That's all, especially when we're doing big book study. But when I'm out in the public, I listen a lot so that I can be of service, just what AA and CA has taught me, to my customers and then to God's kids and God and all his kids. So I listen a lot. But that is a principle because I honestly, my life is just amazing to me. And I'm not talking about just monetarily. I'm talking about the freedom of addiction has been way taken away from me years ago, but the freedom of bondage to self. As long as I live in the disciplines of 10, 11, 12. And I know Bill is writing this to the wife and what she should be doing here. You know, be happy, be cheerfully see him through another more sprees.
Oof.
I'm just looking at this a little differently. I'm just looking at this as a sponsor, as a friend of someone, as a protege that I'm working with. Yeah, I mean, dude, I remember a guy saying, "I don't know why I drank." I'm like, "Because you're alcoholic." Well, why am I an alcoholic? That is a great question, dude. Let's find out why you're an alcoholic. Well, I'm thinking. Then he said, "I remember him starting out. Well, because my mom was an alcoholic." Okay, biologically, probably so. But what made you an alcoholic? Why are you an alcoholic? And then we read the text, right? We talked about the early in Doctor's opinion, and then I can educate him and see if he can find his truth, so he can concede to his innermost self. Then we can get busy and do the work. That's the best part because if I understand step one, as I do now, I'm not giving up on that guy. And that guy, maybe I got through to him to open up his mind enough to say, "Hey, I will never be successful at picking up a drink or drug ever again, no matter what. No power, no choice, no control." Then we can get busy and see what he needs to have access to that power, and we'll go right to two and go on through the work here. So I don't know. Bill's trying to sell some books here too, by the way, I think. I just think that's one of my notes. Go ahead, David.
So husband number 3, it's funny. This paragraph ends with, if your husband is otherwise a normal individual, your chances are good at this stage. The way they describe husband number 3, it's hard for me to imagine normal in the rest of his life because they paint a pretty bleak picture. But you know, it's fantastic at the end of how they describe that husband number 3. It says you can be quite hopeful of a situation like this when they're really describing someone who's in really, really bad shape. And that's because, as we talked about at the time, the more beat up and hopeless a person is, the more hopeful the people that love him or her can be, right? Because the more powerless, the more hopeless, the more likely they are to pick up the spiritual toolkit, right? So, and that's really suggested again with the opening of the paragraph. If you have a husband number 3, you may be in luck because he might be so beat up that the ears might be open, right? Be certain he wants to stop, right? And it's basically saying, don't force this. If he wants it, be enthusiastic. David talked about cheerfully seeing through. There's a lot of tall asks in here from Bill. That's another one. Cheerfully see him through more sprees, right? As he's smashing the treasured crockery and burning the mattresses. I don't know how much cheer there's going to be. I get it. You know, it's trying to stay spiritual through the process, but it's a tall order, right? And then goes on to talk about In some cases, maybe better let someone outside the family present the book. Again, going back to working with others, it talks about see if you can get the doctor to bring it up. It's a very delicate balance here with the people who love us, our spouses. How much should they push? How much should they encourage? How much should they be enthusiastic before they start driving us away? So yeah, is this a little manipulative? Yeah, to get somebody else, that's okay. Who else is highly manipulative uh, in their powerlessness and unmanageability? Me, right? So a little manipulation to help try to get me healthy seems okay. Seems okay in my book, right? If your husband is otherwise normal individual, again, your chances are good at this stage. I don't know how normal, but there's plenty of hope. You know, the more beat up we are. You would suppose that men in the fourth classification would be quite hopeless, but that is not so. Many of Alcoholics Anonymous were like that. Everybody had given them up. Defeat seemed certain. Yet often such men had spectacular and powerful recoveries. And I just want to be clear here. Let me just hop in real quick, David, because I was talking about hopelessness and hopefulness. And so what Bill's saying here is you suppose that the men in the fourth classification, so sort of the worst of the worst, right? The profound alcoholics would be quite hopeless. And what Bill is saying here is he's saying he gets that as the spouses, we might think their opportunity to get better is without hope. But the way in which we talk about hopelessness is we want the alcoholic, the addict, to feel hopeless. I felt hopeless. Guys, that's the only reason I showed up at my first meeting. If I thought I had any other way, any other avenue, do you think I would have shown up to hang out with you guys? Hell no. I would have kept running or muscling or fighting or outthinking this, but I couldn't. I was powerless and I was without hope. And because I was hopeless, there's actually then great hope for my recovery. Right? Many of Alcoholics Anonymous, many of all our 12-step fellowships were like that. Everybody had given them up. Defeat seems certain. This is what the people around us who love us think. Yeah. Yet often such men had spectacular and powerful recoveries. I mean, God, that hopeless word is so important. Please come in hopeless, because I hope that, in my experience, not perfect, but it usually equates to a good dose of willingness.
Yeah, the way I understood it is early in Alcoholics Anonymous, you really had to be a low bottom drunk, and there's very many of them, right? Bill was certainly a low bottom drunk. Bob was certainly a low bottom drunk. And that's how you got invited in. They would have you over to the house. We'd have one meeting a week, but then we would hang out all week long. We would. That's what we would do. And then we would do the steps quickly. And we would go through the steps. And I have a little historical document. And because I brought this, I mentioned 75% success rate early in AA in New York anyways, somewhat New York. But let's talk about Cleveland and Claire Schneider in the success rate that he had. Let me just read this real quickly. The first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous in Cleveland, Ohio was held on May 11th, 1939. 1 month and a day after the first edition of Alcoholics Anonymous was published on April 10th, 1939. Writing to a member trying to get AA started in a new city, Bill Wilson said, here's what Bill said. I explain this at some length because I want you to be successful with yourself and the people with whom you work. We used to pussyfoot on the spiritual business a great deal more out here in New York City, and the result was bad. Listen to what he's saying here. For our record falls quite a lot short of the performance of Akron and Cleveland, where there are now about 350 alcoholics. Again, 1939, a year and a month after a month and a day after the big book came out. Where there are about 350 alcoholics, many of them sober 2 or 3 years. That's a lot of sobriety back then, with less than 20% ever having any relapse. And even greater, 93% success rate was reported in Cleveland AA, whose first group was founded in May of 1939, shortly after the big book was published in April of that year. Clarence Schneider, Dr. Bob Sponsee, and the founder of AA in Cleveland, is quoted by saying, and Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, so look it up if you'd like to, It's in the back. I should have gave you a page. I'm sorry, I don't have it right here. Clarence said, I think AA was more effective in those days. Records in Cleveland showed that 93% of those who came to us never had a drink again. 93%, because they didn't pussyfoot around. This is a spiritual program of action. When I discovered that people had slips in AA, it really shook me up. Mitchell K., Clarence Snyder's biographer, reported as to the 93% success rate in Cleveland. 2 years after the publication of the book, Alcoholics Anonymous, and Clarence had a survey of all the members in Cleveland. He concluded that by keeping most of the old program, including the 4 absolutes and the Bible, 93% of those surveyed had maintained uninterrupted sobriety. 3 of Clarence Snyder's sponsees wrote, of the first 260 people who came to AA in Cleveland, 93% never drank again. These Cleveland groups grew from 1 to 30 in a year. I just think that's amazing. And we don't have anywhere close to that kind of success rate anymore. So when Bill's directing the spouse to do this kind of stuff as a sponsor, we're in the business of saving lives. I don't have any power to do that on my own. But if I see a opportunity of willingness on that guy or that gal or they or them, I'm going to work with them shoulder to shoulder through this process. And I will match your willingness. The day you become an Alcoholics Anonymous and you ask me to be your sponsor, I'm going to ask you to write your sobriety date in the front of your book on that blank page. And then I'm also going to tell you to put the day that you said you're willing to go to any lengths, that date also. Because I'm going to remind you a month from now, when you call me up and say, I can't go to the meeting tonight because I got a toothache or a headache. Where's your willingness to go to any lengths? You would have got a bottle guaranteed for that toothache or that headache. So we've got to be willing to go to any lengths here. And I want to have the same kind of, we want to have the same kind of success rate. We have that right here in this group. We all can have that because we have, I'm done good and for all, permanent recovery.
Okay, continuing on the top of 114. There are exceptions. Some men have been so impaired by alcohol that they cannot stop. Sometimes there are cases where alcoholism is complicated by other disorders. A good doctor or psychiatrist can tell you whether these complications are serious. In any event, try to have your husband read this book. His reaction may be one of enthusiasm. If he's already committed to an institution, but can convince you and your doctor that he means business, give him a chance to try our method, unless the doctor thinks his mental condition too abnormal or dangerous. We make this recommendation with some confidence. For years, we've been working with alcoholics committed to institutions. Since this book was first published, AA has released thousands of alcoholics from asylums and hospitals of every kind. The majority have never returned. The power of God goes deep.
Mm. Okay.
I'm so sorry. Oh, sorry.
Go, Abby.
I have asylums, which is psychiatric hospitals or places where the very sick, very poor, or insane are cared for. And I'm going to post a link to this Oakworth.net that has all the page numbers and stuff that you just read off, David.
Oh, aren't you sweet? Thank you, Abby. Yeah, so they're saying there are exceptions, and we know on page 58 that we talk about those who are constitutionally capable of being honest with themselves. So meaning that I'm unable to see the truth about myself. That's what that means. But then it says, if in any event, try to have your husband read this book. So always we're going to go back to the text, right? Because this is the message. This is the message. There's never been any failure in Alcoholics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, or any other anonymous, ever. Ever. If I do this work honestly and thoroughly, and I do it on a daily basis, minute by minute, moment by moment, as long as I get connected to a power of God, because the power of God goes deep. God's presence in my life is closer than my breath. And I did not know that until I got sober and started practicing these principles of success in my life, because they are principles of success. I got to give him a chance to try our method. Meaning I'm going to get him to God quickly here. He says, then we make these recommendations with some confidence. That means through our experience. If I can get sober, you can get sober, right? No doubt about it. I may not be, my bottom may not be as bad as yours, or maybe worse, my childhood and all these other things, outside circumstances. But I drank when I couldn't, I couldn't manage the amount I drank, and when I stopped, I couldn't stay stopped. And my life is horribly unmanageable, and I know that today. Today, it doesn't look anything like that. And so, and then bottom of that paragraph, it says, since this book was first published, AA has released thousands of alcoholics from asylums. And David expressed that when he was reading, and his voice went up, from asylums, hospital of every kind. The majority have never returned. That is reemphasizing the success rate that Clarence Snyder had. And then the first, even New York and Akron had the 75% success rate. Why? Because of the power of God goes deep. I was in a meeting. We were in a meeting Monday night, and I got my 25-year coin. And one guy, and I used to do this too, and he says, "How'd you do that, David?" My answer is, I did not do that. By the grace of God, the Fellowship of Cocaine Anonymous was a Cocaine Anonymous meeting, a good sponsor, a big book sponsor, the textbook of Alcoholics Anonymous in 12 steps. I have all the freedom I've ever wanted, or I thought I would never experience. That's the grace of God. That goes deep.
Thanks, David. Yeah, just some good reminders here, both to those of us in recovery helping newcomers, or as our spouse is trying to help us. We are not physicians. I mean, and even if you are a physician, if you actually happen to be, probably better to let somebody else make the diagnosis. Let's not be amateur physicians. Let's not be amateur mental health professionals here. Goes on to talk about, if he's already committed to an institution, but can convince you and your doctor that he means business, give him a chance to try our method. What's our method? 12-step recovery, right? Being a part of the fellowship in unity, carrying the message, being in service, right? All those things. That's our method. And here's the thing. For those of us that have multiple things going on, some other mental disorders, and also alcoholism, drug addiction, whatever the process addiction is, or substance, we don't know whether somebody has to get their other mental health situation square before they can get sober and recovered, or do they have to get sober and recovered and then they'll take care of the other mental health situation? Don't know. We don't have an opinion on that, right? That is up to them to figure out, between them, their God, and their doctors. That order of operations, we don't have a position on. All we can do is offer to be of help for somebody who wants to take the steps and do the work. And I will just triple down again on what David was talking about here. Since this book was first published, AA has released thousands of alcoholics from asylums and hospitals of every kind. We don't really have alcoholics and addicts in asylums and hospitals anymore. I mean, short term, right? Because of insurance, we have detox, things like that. But mostly what we have is treatment centers, right? So a lot of us go into treatment centers regularly, go and speak and pick up sponsees. I just got another one. David and I were there 2 Fridays ago. New sponsee guy called me, man, got out, heard from him one time. That was that. Okay. Right. Which is sort of my typical experience. It's all right. I'll be here. Maybe he needs a little bit more pain. That's okay too. Continuing on 114, time check. Okay. You may have the reverse situation on your hands. Perhaps you have a husband who is at large, but who should be committed. Oof. Some men cannot or will not get over alcoholism. When they become too dangerous, we think the kind thing is to lock them up. But of course, a good doctor should always be consulted. The wives and children of such men suffer horribly, but not more than the men themselves.
Yeah. So in that paragraph here, says we may have the reverse situation on our hands. Perhaps you have a husband who's at large, but who should be committed. David just pointed that out in the last paragraph too. Absolutely, I am not a doctor. I don't know that. But if they are harming their wives physically, we certainly are harming them emotionally. There's no doubt about it. I did that. Or my children, or themselves. They should be committed and let the professionals take care of them. Some men cannot or will not get over alcoholism. So we read about that on page 58, that some can or will not. Like, we met a lot of cannots, but how about will not? I don't know about that. And it says when they became too dangerous, had them lock up. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to read that again. But of course, the doctor should always be consulted. I just want to emphasize that I don't have any professionalism about what a guy does. I sponsor a couple of people who are bipolar. Sponsor them for decades. They take their medication, they go see their doctor, and they work the 12 steps of recovery. And they educated me on what bipolar is, so that I can be a better sponsor too. But then the one thing I don't really agree with is this last sentence here with Bill. The wives and children of such men suffer horribly. That's true, but not more than the men themselves. I don't know about that. I did a lot of harm, and I think the greatest sin I ever committed in my relationship with my wife is I kept stealing her hope. I maybe get a week, a couple days sober, and hope is a vision beyond my present circumstances. And she would start to get a little hope that I'm going to go to some meetings. So I came in 93 and I got sober in 99. So I bounced in and out of the rooms for a bit. And I would just tell you that that was a huge sin. Let's go to go forward in the book a little bit to page 122 in the third paragraph, the last paragraph in the family afterwards, which we'll be getting to in a few weeks. It says the cessation of drinking is but the first step away from a highly strained abnormal condition. A doctor said to us, years of living with an alcoholic is almost as sure to make any wife or children neurotic. The entire family is, to some extent, ill. Let families realize that they start their journey, that all will not be fair weather. Each in their turn may be footsore and may struggle. So Bill's kind of contradicting himself, because now he's telling us that's a lot of harms. That's a lot of illness right there that's going on with the family. Mine's not necessarily worse than theirs. Maybe kidney disease, liver failure, maybe all this stuff is all true. I'm not saying that isn't, but the fact is if in untreated alcoholism or in active drinking and drugging, I am harming my family absolutely as much as I'm hurting myself, I believe.
Thanks, David. Yeah, so I think the key point of this paragraph is what David already took us back to page 58. Some men cannot or will not get over alcoholism, right? Just going back to 58 for one more sec here. Let's just recap, because it's been so long since we've actually read this, right? Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. Pretty simple, hard work, right? Like the effort is massive. What we have to do is pretty simple. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. So the way that somebody is built, they cannot be honest, right? They are sociopathic, they're psychopathic. I don't know. They have some other diagnoses. If Ashton was here, Ash could explain some of these things better to us. So some just can't and some won't. And what are we to do? Right? It's pretty simple. If you qualify and you want to put forth the effort, I'll try to help, but I can only meet people where they're at. One more short paragraph and then should be a good time to wrap up. But sometimes you must start life anew. We know women who have done it. If such women adopt a spiritual way of life, their road will be smoother. Okay.
The only thing I would add to that is, yes, Al-Anon does exist. Thank you, Lois. It does exist, and you're talking about the 12 steps there. So the Al-Anon member can get sober regardless if the alcoholic gets sober or not. That's the common theme in Al-Anon. Absolutely, that's true. So that's all I really got with that.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, right? This is all, it's the same thing is happening through this chapter, to the wives, to the husbands, to the spouses. We're spiritually sick. You guys are spiritually sick, but we can all get better irrespective of each other. Wife or no wife, husband or no husband, job or no job, kids or no kids, right? Money or no money. With God, with the program of recovery, I can get better with or without my alcoholic or non-alcoholic better half. Right? This is my journey. This is my relationship with God, bottom line. All right, we rarely do this, but we're going to stop 3 minutes early tonight. The next paragraph, I'd read it and we'd be done. So let me stop the recording.